Imagine it. The year is 1809. The Napoleonic Wars are still going on. And France is kind of starting trouble everywhere. The Finnish War is finished. The London Royal Opera House is finally open. The metric system has been accepted in Amsterdam. And the Swedish king has been captured and forced to abdicate. And finally, there's peace between Russia and Sweden. And the first steamboat makes a voyage in the U.S. Speaking of the U.S., we have finally elected our fourth president. James Madison was Jefferson's Secretary of State. When he ran, he beat his opponent, the Federalist opponent. 12 of the 17 states voted for him. For the first time, Congress set aside a specific amount of money, $12,000, to give the president, the new president, to make the White House his own. One of the first things he does as president is fire his Secretary of State, and James Monroe steps in. You'll hear more of that name later. Within Madison's first year as president, he's already having problems with a new country. So we've already had France and England be pains in our necks. Now we have Spain. Spain took the side of France, and so they are in Florida now. And England is in Florida now, different parts. And so Madison was kind of afraid that they were going to kind of work together, in a sense, they were going to fight each other and take parts of Florida, and probably cause us more problems. But Madison was under the impression that Florida was part of the Louisiana Purchase, which happened in the last presidency. Madison, at this point, sees cause to make a declaration of war. This is 1811 now. And that number might sound familiar because the following year is 1812. Before anything could happen with Europe, though, we had some internal conflicts going on. And by internal conflicts, I mean we are having issues. And by we, I mean General Harrison, a name you will hear again. He decides it's time to start a war with the Native Americans, namely Tecumseh, who was the leader of the Shawnee. And what he was doing that for was he was a little nervous because Tecumseh was gathering the tribes for like a sort of confederation of tribes, and that made him very nervous. The attack was considered kind of successful. Tecumseh fled north to get protection, essentially. But Madison tries to view this as a time of peace going forward for the frontier. While in the fighting mood, Congress accepts Madison's plea for 10,000 Army recruits, except they did one better. They said, forget 10,000, let's do 25,000. However, don't put any of that towards the Navy. Keep it strictly for the Army, for whatever reason. It was around this time that Madison finds out that the Canadian government is trying to create a rebellion in the New England states. And he uses that information to go to war. And they borrowed $25 million to go to war. Essentially, War of 1812 is now begun. By 1814, Napoleon has been defeated, but the wars are still going on. This just enables England to put all of its focus on defeating the U.S. in the War of 1812, plus a couple of years. Now, Harrison has had enough of his time fighting with the Native Americans, and he resigns as general, and Andrew Jackson comes in. Another name you'll hear again later, and another name associated with Native Americans. So, to help you catch up, we are at war with England, Canada, Spain kind of, France a little bit, and then the Creek tribe has decided to declare war on the U.S. So back to Canada. The U.S., upon learning all this information, has decided they're going to act. Now, remember, the war wasn't that long ago, the Revolutionary War, and so we're kind of a little bit ballsy still. So the U.S. decides to go torch Parliament in Canada to the ground. And the Canadians kind of figured out they knew who it was, so they decided to hit us back and decide to burn the White House to the ground. And well, that is actually a very historical moment, because Dolly Madison, James's wife, she is one of her most famous moments, if not one of the most famous moments by all first ladies in history, is she grabbed a bunch of stuff. Like, she wanted to keep things, but she grabbed this giant painting of George Washington. In the midst of all the chaos of the sacking of Washington, D.C., is when Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. So that really puts those words in a little bit more perspective. It's around this time that Andrew Jackson decides to take the Native American problem into his own hands, and he travels to Florida to hunt down Creek warriors. And then he goes back to New Orleans, which there's a huge Jackson Square there. That's another story. He basically is lauded as a national hero at this point. By Valentine's Day in 1815, the War of 1812 comes to an end. You would think, oh, it's going to be peace now. It is not. 3 months later, another declaration of war is declared against pirates. But hey, there is a positive. We've gained a state. No, not Florida. Indiana, 1816. Some key legislation. First, we have the embargo on all ships for the War of 1812. The Religious Freedom Act, which is kind of important. The Non-Intercourse Act, which was an act that replaced the embargo from Jefferson. Basically, it says we can trade with anyone that isn't English or French. And of course, that wasn't super popular, so that was replaced by Macon's Bill number 2. It allowed Americans to carry English and French goods, but not to let English or French ships come to the ports. So, progress? If that's not a messy presidency, I don't know what is. 8 years of constant conflict is a lot. That's got to be an incredible amount of stress for Madison and everyone involved. But it does make you wonder what James Monroe's presidency is going to be like. And if you're interested in that, stick around, because that's next.